Origin Gents, Homer Reacts, and this is England South Sea Bubble, Too Big to Fail, Extra Part 2 by the channel Extra Credits. Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? Institutions that are way too big to fail always gets away with shit like this, like stock market and things that happened in 2008. Nobody got held accountable, right? The main people who were responsible for that, if anything, got paid for it. So that's just fucked up. So yeah, South Sea Bubble, right? So basically, as far as I remember from other videos, the core of it is they're going to create a company that will basically, I guess, do a business trade at a trading route that they exclusive rights to, right? People think that has value, so people basically buy stocks and just price went up. From that money, basically they pay for shit, and eventually people realize, wait a minute, there is nothing value of that. So apparently the value of the stock goes down, because in the end, anything has a value because people think it has a value, and that's what they're playing with. Every bubble, starts with that, right? Because people think certain things has value until they realize, wait a minute, this has no value. So yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I can really blame the guy at the time, right? Who was his name? I don't know. Harley? Yeah, Harley. He basically, tried to make sure that debt, which was extremely high, which they just paid for very recently, after that many years and century. So, I don't blame the guy, because the debt was so high, and he couldn't turn to the central bank, because central bank was controlled by his opposing party, right? He was affiliated with political party. So what would he do, right? He had a real issue there, so he just looked at anything that would solve the issue. Apparently a scam was in order. Obviously that would create more problems, but I'm pretty sure he didn't thought of that at the time. He thought that, okay, temporarily, right, this way we'll get the money and eventually we'll pay for it. He didn't realize that this is gonna be a bigger issue on the road, I guess. So yeah, let's watch it.
When we last left off, Harley, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and Blunt, one of the principal operatives of the Hollow Sword Blade Company, were looking for something bigger and better than a simple lottery to keep the government afloat. The scheme they came up with was the South Sea Company. It's South Sea Company, by the way, not South Seas Company. I think I was saying South Seas Company for the entire last episode. Sorry about that. Anyway, Harley, stymied at every turn and frustrated with the Whig-controlled Bank of England's refusal to help, finally thought, what if we just built a Tory-controlled company to do the Bank of England's job? At which point Blunt probably...
Yeah, so, was the bank wasn't, properly recognized as the Central Bank of England at the time or something? Because how can it be politically, aligned like that? I mean, we saw the, paper money episode in that, obviously it showed that how Bank of England was the first proper central bank. So maybe this is really early times, right? Where people didn't basically align it as a country's main central bank. Maybe that's why it was politically aligned. So opposing party thought maybe we should create something similar for our own.
Started seeing dollar signs and hyperventilating. Together they came up with a plan for a trading company that would assume all of the government's debt. Here's how it would work. Anybody who held British government debt would get to exchange that debt for shares in the new company. The government would pay the newly formed company roughly 6% interest on that debt, or about £500,000, a far lower interest rate than the government had been paying when all the debt was in the hands of private individuals. The company would then turn around and use that money as a dividend for its investors. But in order to make this offer enticing, there had to be something more, and that's where the South Seas part comes in. You see, fundamentally, to convince anybody holding government debt to give up the principal of their debt, the amount of money they first lent to the government, for stock in an unknown company, and a dividend payment that was probably lower than the interest they were supposed to be getting anyway, you'd have to convince them that the stock they were getting was going to be worth far more than the debt they already held. So on top of that £500,000, the government was...
This is going to be like Bitcoin. But apparently it wasn't. I don't know. Bitcoin, I mean, we are so sure of that right now, but that could be a bubble too, right, in the future. So yeah, this is kind of clever. Okay, there's a massive debt, so why not just take a debt and convince them to invest in a company that they'll think that it has a real value, but obviously even they know that it doesn't, right? But they probably thought that we are going to, along the line with all the money that we gather, we'll make something out of it, I guess.
Going to give the company
temporary
annually.
Loan type of
it
thing.
Also gave them a monopoly on trading in the South Seas. And man, did they turn on the hype machine for this. Everybody from the government to the directors of the Hollow Sword Blade Company to Daniel Defoe, the guy who wrote Robinson Crusoe, started talking about the unimaginable riches that would flow from the South Seas into Britain once this company was established. And everybody in Britain knew how well the Honorable East Indian Company had done for its shareholders.
Oh, yeah.
Here was a chance to get in on the ground floor of something similar. There was only one small problem with this scheme. The South Seas mentioned in the deal referred to Central and South America. And by Central and South America, they meant all the major ports in Central and South America. And by all the major ports, they meant a bunch of ports that happened to be exclusively owned by Spain. And, well, Britain...
Seriously, how does that even work? South Sea. Yeah, most of South America was controlled by the Spanish. I mean, that's the whole point.
...was currently at war with Spain. Like I said last time, Britain was at war with, like, everybody. This didn't faze Harley or Blunt, though. To them, the answer was simple. They would simply end a decades-long multinational war. This time, they got the guy who wrote Gulliver's Travels to do their propaganda work. They laid it on so thick, they even got the famous Whig Sir Robert Walpole and John Churchill, the Duke of Marlborough, a hero of the War of Spanish Succession, locked in the Tower of London as part of their efforts to smear the opposition. But for all this, they still didn't have the votes they needed to get past the House of Lords. Funny thing about the House of Lords, though, all you had to do to be a part of it was be a lord. You didn't need to be elected to the House of Lords. Until recently, if you were a peer of the realm, you just got a seat. So, with a little prodding from Harley, the Queen created 12 new peers, and presto, a majority of the House of Lords now wanted peace. But oh, the irony. By locking themselves into peace, they locked themselves out of the peace they wanted. Britain's push for peace meant that they made peace independently and earlier than their war allies, which left them with little to bargain with when it came time to actually work out the terms of the peace. In the end, the Spanish gave the South...
Oh, that was so fucking weak. There might be, economical geniuses where they know how to, I guess, create a company and create this kind of a bubble where they can find money, but not a genius when it comes to war. They didn't negotiate the peace terms before they, basically ran for peace in their own country. Now they created this, went to the whole this effort to create new lords and everything and basically pass the peace terms, right, from their country. Like, oh, look at that, England wants peace. Alienated all their allies, and Spain is like, oh yeah, you want to sue peace, and now you don't have any allies left? Yeah, I think we're gonna have our terms now.
South Sea Company, the questionably lucrative right to trade slaves in the South Seas, and the right to send one ship a year to each of the Spanish ports. One ship a year. The Honorable East India Company was sending fleets of ships every month to maintain the kind of profits that Blunt and Harley had advertised. So while the public would continue to be told about the riches of the South Seas, it was now clear to everybody close to the venture that the South Sea Company was really just a financial institution whose sole business was managing the government debt. Then, in 1714, Queen Anne, the monarch of England, died without an heir. After much debate, George I, the Elector of Hanover, was chosen by Parliament to succeed Anne, and with the new king came a new government. Harley fell out of favor, and the Whigs regained dominance.
Whoa.
So what did our good Mr. Blunt do in response? He did what any upstanding citizen would do, and promptly booted his erstwhile ally Harley to the curb, replaced most of the Tory board members in the South Sea Company with Whigs, and, in a stroke of genius, got the king's son, George II, to replace Harley as the largely ceremonial governor of the company. He even got...
I mean, what do you want him to do? Go with the sinking ship? Harley was fucked because it's a king. New king favors the Whigs. I mean, Harley's fucked anyway. What do you want him Blunt to do? I mean, it's kind of understandable, right? I mean, he has to stay afloat, and all the shit he has done, if it gets ousted, right? He'll be like a traitor or something. People will see like you duped us, right? You just send one ship a year that cannot possibly have as worth as you're showing us. So you basically scammed us out of our money. So he has to let this, basically whole thing run along. So he has to have a Whigs on, I guess, at the time.
The king, who was desperate for funds for the royal household, to invest in the company himself. To further smooth things over in the transition, and to avoid some of the wrath of the now resurgent Walpole and Churchill, the very men the South Sea Company got locked up a few years before, the South Sea Company agreed to forgive the 2 years of interest the previous government had owed it, which helped the new administration to keep things afloat. In return, the government allowed the company to issue more stock of an equivalent value to offset the loss, which meant the company had roughly £10 million of stock issued. To put that in perspective, that's about half the total value of stock issued by all companies in England. This for a trading company that's only ever managed to lose money on trading. This wild success led members of the government to decide that it was time to offload more of the government's debt onto the South Sea Company. Because why wouldn't you, right? After all, if one company accounted for more than half of, say, the New York Stock Exchange with no discernible source of income, clearly the correct play would be to make it bigger, instead of, investigating its activities. So the new plan was to allow the South Sea Company to issue
Yeah, but I think, they did that knowing that this is going to be an issue, but at least that debt will be gone, right? Now it's issue with the South Sea Company. When the bubble burst, it won't be on them, right? It would be a massive issue, but it won't be on them. I think they deliberately did that. Like, okay, we can see this ship is going to sink, right? This thing is, boasting way too much profit than it possibly can have. Fuck it, let's just give our debt to it too, or something like that. So when the bubble burst, we will not be the one who's accounted for. I guess they just wanted all the blame to go to South Sea Company.
Even more stock, and in exchange, the company, wait for it, would handle the government's debt from running the 1710 lottery. The lottery Blunt himself had created. Genius. That is a Montgomery Burnsian kind of genius. But make no mistake, the government's strange confidence in the South Sea Company wasn't just due to starry-eyed politicians' desire for somebody else to deal with their mess. There was something else to it. In 1717, the king and his son, George II, had gotten into a fight. In an act of spite, the king had removed his son as governor of the South Sea Company and replaced him with himself. John Blunt now had the king himself as the company's royal figurehead. Whoa, right? Not only did this mean that
Damn. I mean, I don't understand this. Blunt knows that his company does not have any physical value to it because they're not doing much of trading there, right? They are barely sending a ship a year. They cannot do nothing.
they received.
So eventually this will be a problem. But I think, he's just hoping that he can make sure that this wheel is constantly spinning, right? So if now the king is basically the figurehead of some sort, people will have even more trust and nobody will even try to think that maybe it doesn't have value. Even though we are not doing any much of trading, people will constantly will have faith in the company, so the stocks will constantly be at high, and maybe eventually I'll do something that basically is profitable for the company, and do something that brings back all the debt money that I basically take from the people. I don't know, maybe he's just being hopeful there. But this is obviously, this bubble will burst. I mean, it's just like digging a hole. How big of a hole you want to dig?
A level of trust and prestige that they had never even come close to earning, but it also meant that the company was now in some ways too big to fail.
Yeah,
if the South Sea Company collapsed, so might faith in the monarch, and they couldn't let that happen. But in 1719...
I mean, that's not really true, is it? I mean, England itself, the entire country was in debt. That's why they created the company in the first place. So it's not like, since the monarch is involved, and if, bubble burst, monarch will basically, the king will basically pay for it, so his image don't get stained, so it's too big of a company now to fail. No, the country itself was in debt. That's why the company was created. So if the bubble bursts, right, if it all comes out in open, the country is not going to pay for it. That's how it started in the first place. They didn't have the money. So I guess it will be a problem. It's not too big to fail. Too big to fail implies to current times where, the stock market basically creates some kind of an issue and the American government basically pays for it. Because our American government is way too rich. They can pay for it. So in that sense, it's too big to fail because basically government will pay for it. Because government can't let that particular body fail. Otherwise, it destabilizes the entire economy. It's times like that when it applies to too big to fail. In this, I don't know, man.
As the lottery debt was being exchanged, another strange occurrence happened. There was a brief abortive attempt to overthrow the king by the Jacobites, the branch of the English monarchy that had itself been overthrown during the Civil War 70 years before. It wasn't successful, but when that whole affair was put to rest, the South Sea Company did everything they could to fuel the sense of jubilation spreading around England, going so far as to peddle fabrications like the fact that the pretender to the throne had been captured, ending the Jacobite threat forever. In doing so, they managed to crank up the stock of the South.
Yeah, that's the main. That is why whenever a massive company's chairman or something is sick, people don't put out the news out there because the stock will basically go down. Like, oh, company's fucked. Let's sell the stocks because stock prices will go down. You can't have that. So if there is a real battle, like somebody's trying to overthrow the king, that is way disastrous. He can't have that. So of course he's gonna say, oh, it's all put down now. You don't have to worry about it.
C company from £100 a share to £114 a share. Doesn't this make you just want to hit one of these people? And that stock value increase is important because when the company had agreed with the government on how much stock they were going to issue, they agreed to an amount that would let them cover all the debt they were picking up at £100 a share. But now, as the stock price rose, they found themselves paying for that same debt at £114 a share. And at that rate, they didn't even need all those shares to cover the debt anymore. What did they do with all those extra shares that they'd issued but that they no longer needed to cover the debt they were obligated to pick up? Why, they sold them and pocketed the profit. Because, of course they did. This gave Blunt ideas. Very, very big ideas. Join us next time for the meteoric rise of the South Sea Company. The
Blunt is...
ennobling of John Blunt. And
yeah, Blunt is basically going crazy here. Because he's ignoring the fact that one day this will all blow up, right? Doesn't matter what. Because doesn't matter how much of a game you play, how clever you become. In the end, you don't have any physical thing to back all that money. So you're just taking money from the people without actually offering anything. Right now, people are in blind. People don't realize that. But one day, people will realize that. And then the stock prices will fall. So basically, you're just scamming people as much as you can until everything falls apart. That's what you're doing. That's just fucked up. See, thing is, what's happening here, South Sea bubble, that's inevitable with the central banking and a whole system that people have created. But that system is not really bad, but it's like democracy, right? I mean, freedom of speech. Obviously, that's important. Freedom of speech is crucial. So, basically nobody's voices get suppressed. But that also means that crazy people can also speak up. So there are always pros and cons to everything. And this kind of whole banking system that, they created. What was that guy? I forgot his name in the Paper Money series. So basically the entire central banking system that was created, it's really good for the economy, right? Like mortgages and everything. It's really good because, you can take money based on, I guess, trust and, value to certain things. That's how these bubbles work. Like people think certain things as a value and it becomes somewhat type of a currency because stock will constantly go up. Because people think it has a value until people realize it doesn't. So it's really hard to regulate sometime, but bubbles will come and go always, and it will affect economy. But as a whole, this is really important because otherwise economy cannot rise as fast as it has been doing so far. Right, people, that was England South Sea bubble, too big to fail, extra history part 2 by the channel Extra Credits. If you like my Rickson phone, like, subscribe, check out the Rickson, there's a link in the description, check out the cards for place, check out the cards, and yeah, I'll see you next time.